Hoodie season has arrived. Making tea.
Now while I'm here, and you can barely see me, and the audio is probably awful, and this entire visual setup is shit, but while I'm here, yeah, welcome to what month do we have? September. Welcome to the September reading update. This is probably, look at the timeline, either this is gonna be a long video or it's gonna be multiple parts again, because we have like 7 books to get through. I'll do my best to concentrate the important things. This should be a-okay, buddy.
Ready to consume in 2 minutes.
Right, let's get to the main location for this vlog. Welcome back again to another reading vlog by your fellow book enthusiast Matt Jerkhole, who rambles on about dumb nonsense and you decide to listen to it. Always nice when we have a little moment like that. The previous vlog from August, I talked about how I had this summer lull where I didn't read that much. I think I'm making up for that this month, because we have, if I counted correctly, 7 freaking books to speak of here. And I'm gonna attempt to be concise and focused so that this doesn't have to be a multi-part video. I would like to have it all done in one thing. That would be great. I'm gonna start with a beloved classic, a book that truly has been talked about for hundreds of years, literally, and I'm sure I can totally add something to this discussion that has never been said before. No, I won't, but I have read this book and I'm gonna give you my little casual opinion on it. Also, honestly, a great introduction for this coming season, for this season that has started now with fall. This is very much a fall book, honestly. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This was another sort of buddy read with my buddy or pal Butlet, aka Dylan, aka a person who will never watch this, so I can shit talk him and he will never know, which is nice. That stinky fella and I, we've kind of honestly wanted to read Frankenstein at least a year ago already. I think originally we wanted to read it last year for October time, around that time, but we just both failed to commit to it. But we tried again now, and I mean, at least I finished this book. I read it. As far as I know, Dylan is still slacking off and is still only halfway through or something. Which I'm gonna shit talk Dylan right here and now. I'm pretty sure it was you, Dylan, you are not watching this, but if you are, I'm pretty sure it was your idea to read Frankenstein together, but you're not doing it. I wasn't even very excited to read this. I was more going into this in the sense of, yeah, Frankenstein, we all know that classic, might as well give it a shot and see if it sticks or whatever. Why not? Surely it won't be a regret to check that one off the list. But it probably wouldn't have been a book that I would have picked out my own. My situation with Frankenstein, with the story of Frankenstein in general, is that, yeah, it is an interesting concept which offers a lot of possibilities for really interesting philosophical, existential, whatever themes to be explored. Yes, and it is interesting, especially interesting because it is such an early piece of work like that. I mean, being written, I think it was, yeah, I have it on my screen right now, first published in 1818. in the 19th century, and which makes this also debatably one or maybe the first like example of like proper science fiction in literature and stuff like that. So there are reasons why it is a classic, why it is still remembered after more than 200 years and whatever, right? I get that, but it's also a thing. Frankenstein is also a thing that has been so popular throughout pop culture. Like, pop culture osmosis does its thing. You know exactly what Frankenstein is about, more or less, even if you haven't ever actually engaged with an immediate adaptation of this, or like the book itself. You don't need to go out and read the book or like watch the classic movies to know what the fuck Frankenstein is, because you will just gather that from pop culture. I feel like it's one of those things where the ideas and subjects and whatever were probably groundbreaking for the time, but I was expecting to go in and like seeing that it didn't hold up in that sense, that we nowadays probably have much more thorough and interesting dissections of these subjects. I was expecting Frankenstein to be, for today's standards, fairly surface level. Although I also want to say I was going into this very much hoping and welcoming the possibility of being surprised. And here we are now. Frankenstein, I enjoyed this decently enough. I'm not in love with it and I will never be a fan of it, but I enjoyed it. There are things about this that I do commend and respect, and I did have a decent time. I'm not regretting having picked this up. There are definitely things about this that hold up. Like, starting at the prose, Mary Shelley definitely manages to write some very atmospheric paragraphs. She does get distracted by landscape descriptions a lot. I mean, which are nice in their own regard, but it happens a lot. But she also really manages to capture like the sorrow and the existential dread of Frankenstein's monster and stuff, which worked well. The final speech by Frankenstein's monster in this book actually kinda really got me emotionally. That was very effective. And Frankenstein's monster is honestly probably the only interesting character in this book. Dr. Victor Frankenstein is just like an asshole. I didn't vibe with Victor Frankenstein at all. I mean, he stands in for this very interesting predicament of having created this life, and now even though this creation is causing problems for him and for other people, he is now struggling with the moral obligation to care for this life that he put into this world without their, like, I guess, consent or whatever. A parent-child relationship, or like a god and its creation relationship, that undoubtedly makes for interesting moral dilemmas. But Victor Frankenstein honestly is just an asshole. A big thing with this book in general is honestly that Frankenstein's monster is not at all, I mean, I'm not gonna be surprising anyone here when I come in with the hot take of Frankenstein's monster was misunderstood or whatever. We all realize that, but the way it is portrayed in this original book is honestly ridiculous. People react to Frankenstein's monster in such a ridiculous and one-sided way that it's like honestly laughable. Could have been handled in a way more interesting way. It makes for a clear showcase of superficiality, where people judge other people on their appearance only, but it's like put to the absolute extreme, so it's hard to take serious. And I don't think it had to be put to this extreme, where people are immediately in shock and terror when they see this brought to life creation, even though it behaves in a very gentle and most of the time surprisingly educated way. And Victor Frankenstein, which is like the protagonist, I guess, of the story, I didn't really like him at all. His plight is so egotistical, arrogant, especially in comparison to Frankenstein's monster, to the creature's predicament. It is very hard to like empathize with Victor Frankenstein. He just acts like a total idiot most of the time. And I think he deserved what he got. He had so many chances to... Oh, whatever. Victor Frankenstein is an idiot. It's what's also interesting about this book, and I can't tell if I want to call it innovative or just strange. This story is written in so many layers. Like there's people telling their story to people, where they tell their story to people, where they tell their story to people. Like at parts, it is like you read the letter of someone who has been told a story by someone else, in which that other person has been told a story by another person, and you go deeper and deeper into these different layers of storytellers, and it's so... Yeah, I cannot tell if this is innovative or just messy. It's really hard for me to decide. But I guess it's interesting, at least for the most part. But yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this. It's Frankenstein, I guess it's fine. It didn't like super surprise me and blow my expectations out of the water or whatever, in like making fantastic philosophical points that I had never come across in other media or whatever. But it is, for the most part, well written and has interesting points. It just has them packaged in a sometimes very moody and atmospheric, but also other times in a very ridiculous and superficial way, I guess, if that's the right word. Like, it's fine. I get why it's a classic. I enjoyed it for the most part. I didn't dislike my time with it, but I'm not gonna be a big fan. I am, however, interested in reading more by Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley's The Last Man. I got that picked up on my list. Maybe I'll get to that someday. I would be interested in that. But yeah, Frankenstein is fine. It's okay. It's been a long time now since I read volume 1 of Junji Ito's Uzumaki, the horror manga that I really enjoyed. And I was back then telling about how I was waiting for the other volumes of the series to be available at the library again. They eventually were. I had them lying around, but I got distracted with other shit and didn't read them for a long time, until I had to bring them back to the library and the deadline got really close, and I finally picked up these books and got them done, which I'm very happy about. I enjoyed those a lot. So I'm gonna put these two together. I don't have them to show because they're already back at the library, but here we are with Uzumaki Volume 2 and 3 by Junji Ito. Now, not to repeat myself too much, but I had read Junji Ito short stories before in the past, but Uzumaki, this 3-volume release as it is, as I had gotten my hands on it, is the first like lengthy, more fleshed out Junji Ito work that I have been reading. And I was really excited for it, and it did absolutely like meet my expectations. Honestly, Junji Ito is a fantastic artist, doing incredibly creative art when it comes to like horrific like gore and like cosmic horror-ish stuff. And he, in this Uzumaki series, he creates this location of a Japanese town, a very regular Japanese town, where all of a sudden, over a span of like months, just really strange things happen that don't seem to particularly be connected. Just one weird thing after another that's really creepy, with the repeating symbol of the spiral, which is a very iconic symbol for Junji Ito's work. He is very open about being pretty much obsessed with the spiral. Also, like, even in a sort of self-deprecating way, there are always like these afterward comics in these books where Junji Ito makes fun of himself for liking the spiral so much or whatever. But he manages to get so much creepy imagery and ideas out of spiral stuff. It's pretty impressive. Here we are with Uzumaki Volume 2 and 3. I think Volume 2 is probably my favorite one out of these 3 books, out of these 3 volumes, because that just had banger after banger. Every single chapter had a dope ass spooky concept. I really loved that one. And then with Uzumaki Volume 3, I was really curious how he would wrap this story up, because while this was all set in one location with recurring characters and this recurring symbol of the spiral, it was still disconnected individual spooky occurrences for the most part. So I was curious how he would actually wrap this up and put it all in a box with a bow around it. And I think he did a good job with the final volume. There was a stretch in the 3rd volume where it spent too much time for me with like this tornado disaster situation that went on for a bit too much in my opinion, but he makes up for that with some bangers towards the end. The finale again has some amazing surreal art, some like cosmic horror stuff, and it's really cool, and it made for a good complete package. That's really all I can say, honestly. Junji Ito is completely rightfully regarded as such a horror legend, and I think his mangas, probably especially Uzumaki, is probably a must read for people that are interested in Japanese horror or like manga horror. Uzumaki is great. Junji Ito's work is amazing. Big fan. Glad I read these. And I'm looking forward to reading more by Junji Ito in the future, 100%. So that's that. We got 3 down, 4 books to go. Now, this next one, we're gonna get a little bit naughty. We're talking about Sex Tech Revolution, The Future of Sexual Wellness by Andrea Barrica. This is a non-fiction book about economy and business. For the most part, this is not gonna be a very like visceral discussion or whatever, but if you would like to skip this not safe for work, this NSFW subject, I guess, although it kinda actually is for work because this is about business, but if you would like to skip this, there are timestamps in the description so you can go ahead to the next book, no problem. But if you are interested in the business side of sexual health and sexual well-being, then this book is probably interesting for you. I probably have said this before myself on this channel, that I am genuinely interested in the industry that spawned out of sexual desire or sexual needs. not just the porn industry, but in general, like this, the sexual wellness industry, because it is such it's just an interesting subject to me. And Sex Tech Revolution puts a very interesting perspective on that in terms of how that is actually an important subject to talk about, while it is not often talked about, because it's often socially unacceptable. The author, Andrea Barrica, is a businesswoman, and she is completely like economically educated. She knows what she's talking about when it comes to business building and whatever, and she has a lot of like actual insight from own practices in the industry, in the market for sex related services and products. And she talks in this book about how the market, the industry for sexual health is neglected a lot because of how socially difficult it is to talk about sex in a professional way. Honestly, the way that I introduced this with calling this not safe for work is kind of the point, because while sex is regarded as an adult subject that is not safe for work usually, it still is a subject that is incredibly, like, it's 100% natural for humans and should therefore be regarded as a normal bodily thing, just like any other bodily function, in terms of services and goods that keep us healthy, like and doctors that should be educated as well. Obviously, this book is mostly looking at this from a perspective of US American stuff, like this is about the USA and their system, and maybe that's a different thing over there than it is in my country or your country or whatever. But I'm sure there's a lot of like overlap and similar things, but it's like things like this where while the porn industry is booming, there barely are like actually reputable businesses that get to develop goods and services that enhance our sexual health and that support our sexual education. Because every time in a professional setting, when somebody tries to discuss something, some subject related to sex or pleasure, it is very quickly shot down as like a sinful or problematic thing. And because of that, there's a lot less innovation and development in this still very natural and important field than we got in like every other like business, you know. And that is the crux of this book, and it is like a bit dissected with a very business oriented way, which is super interesting. I love when this sort of thing is really looked at from a professional industry point of view. It's super interesting to me. This is a pretty brief book though, so while it does have a lot of interesting facts and a lot of interesting personal experiences from the author, it doesn't go on for very long, and I wished it would have more, it would go deeper, but I can't complain. It's still a very valuable book, especially if you wanna get into the industry, into this business yourself. This book is as much an educational like look around as it is an actual call to action for you, the reader, to start your own startup business. And it takes its time to genuinely and honestly and thoroughly give you starters and tips for how to found your own startup business, to get more force in this field, get it out of the neglected shadow of shame, of professional shame or whatever, and help grow it. which is a very interesting thing. I am not gonna be a startup founder. I'm not gonna go into business like that. So some parts of this book weren't meant for me, but I do respect that she put this out there for people that can get value out of it. Which is why I can't honestly rate it lower just because it isn't for me, because this is genuinely an educational valuable book, just for others more so than for me. But even aside from the actual like startup business talk, I got a lot of interesting things out of this when it comes to the dissection, the look around the cause of why this is even a thing, why sexual health is so neglected in a lot of like professional parts of the world, which leads to a perpetual circle of shame around a very natural subject that just hinders health for no good reason. And that's an interesting subject that is written down very, very thoughtfully here, I think. It was a good book. If this is a subject that interests you, I think it's very much worth picking this up. If you are into business and like wanna like get into a market with a lot of future potential and actually want to proactively found a company or whatever, this is probably a golden pickup for you. But yeah, that's that. That was an interesting book. Thumbs up. Okay, 3 more books to go. We can do this. This has been very breezy so far. The next 2 books also have like a connection, so I'm probably gonna discuss them together as well. It makes sense. They are from the same author and pretty much, and they are dealing with a similar theme, and they were very much these 2 books were very like complementary, like supplementary to each other. One I have physically, one I have only gotten my hands on digitally. This is A Nobleman from Khorasan by Khalilullah Khalili, translated by M.F. Munzager, probably mispronounced that, and an assembly of Moths, selected poems of Khalilullah Khalili, with an introduction by Whitney Azoy that's relevant. So I continued my Afghanistan reads. Like I have talked about Afghan literature before. Especially this year, Afghanistan has been a subject again and again, and I did some more of that. Both of these texts are created by Khalilullah Khalili, who was one of the most prominent, most important, most influential writers, poets, artists in Afghanistan. One is an actual novel that he wrote, and the other is a collection of poems that he wrote. I had talked about Khalilullah Khalili before when I had the Quatrains of Khalilullah Khalili, which was also a translated collection of poems. That book was nice and interesting, but very basic. These 2 books are different level, honestly. I think I'm gonna start with the poetry collection, An Assembly of Moths. An Assembly of Moths is like a title that I have seen floating around the internet a bunch, because it is often mentioned as one of the rare publications of Khalili texts outside of the country of Afghanistan, but it's super hard to find. It's like a super rare book. I have been looking for this all year pretty much. I finally found a way to read this on this random digital library for Middle Eastern literature called Recta, which I never heard of before, and the website is honestly kind of messy and buggy, but I was finally able to read it on there, and I'm so grateful that I was. This is an English translation of Khalili's poems, a bunch of them. Obviously, when you translate poetry, oftentimes there's a lot that goes missing with the language, because poetry is obviously a very language-based art form. But this book is produced by Khalilullah actual son, which is dope as fuck. He helped translate these together with Whitney Azoy, who is a British anthropologist, or maybe American, one of the other, who has a lot of professional history with Afghan culture. And those two met, Khalili's son and Whitney Azoy, and decided to translate and publish a bunch of the poems of Khalilullah Khalili. Masood Khalili is the son of Khalilullah Khalili, the one that translated the poems for this book together with Whitney Azoy. And additionally, Sohalia Khalili, the wife of Masood Khalili, who is a visual artist, did a lot of paintings for this book, which makes for such a genuinely great package of the poetry and visual accompaniment. It's such a nice book. The quatrains of Khalilullah Khalili book that I read earlier this year was very bare bones. It was pretty much it was literally just the poems in different languages. But this is like a whole package. You have the poems with really, really nice art, and I was so excited to see this when I found out about this. This has a lengthy introduction by Whitney Azoy about the significance of Khalilullah Khalili. And Whitney Azoy is dope because he wrote that book about the Afghan sport of buzkashi, which I read and absolutely loved earlier this year. So imagine my excitement when I find out that Whitney Azoy worked on this and wrote a lengthy introduction. And this introduction adds so much to this, because he writes about why Khalili is so prominent and so important for Afghan culture, why he has been such a big name, and talks about what poetry in Afghanistan means. Like there's different layers with that, mainly because in Afghanistan there's a huge cultural appreciation for verbal exchange of things. Writing it down isn't that much of a thing, rather than it is to verbally exchange it. And poetry is incredibly popular in Afghanistan, always has been, but it is rarely written down, and rather it is an art form in itself to recite them verbally, which also adds a completely different layer to it, because each person might change these poems, so these words kind of get a new life, they develop and whatever, and that adds a completely different layer to it than, Western world written poetry, right, where it's like static for the most part. And that is such an interesting perspective and context for going into these poems, which also explains why some of these poems were familiar to me, but different. In the quatrains of Khalilullah Khalili, I had some poems in there that I recognized again in this collection, but with small differences. And with the context of this, like, appreciation of verbal exchange and the living, changing ways of poetry in the country, right? You see where I'm getting at? It makes sense. It's super fucking interesting. This was just a really satisfying and neat package. The genuinely educational introduction by Whitney Azoy, the extremely authentic translations of his father's poetry by Masood Khalili, the literal actual son of the artist, that's dope. And then the complementary art by his wife, Sohalia Khalili. This just made for such a nice package. It's such a good poetry book. I loved that for that reason. It was great. I really got a lot out of this. It adds bonus points too for having a bunch of bugs in this. I mean, the title alone is an assembly of moths and stuff, and there are more poems, including bugs in this. I think Khalilullah Khalili really respected bugs, and I fucking love that. So that is that. And then parallel to that, I read these both like in the same week or whatever. There's the novel by Khalilullah Khalili, like a full actual novel, not just poetry, which I was extra excited to be able to read, because poetry is one thing, but this is, as far as I know, the only novel by Khalilullah Khalili that was ever translated to a language that I understand, and I'm super grateful for that, even though, admittedly, this translation by M.F. Munzager, there's a nice picture of him in back here too. This translation is pretty rough. There are grammar errors, syntax errors. It's not like the smoothest. It's generally a bit hard to tell how much of the style is actually Khalili's style or how much is like from Munzager's translation. But nonetheless, I understood the content. I got further appreciation for Afghan culture and history. And I'm really grateful for this guy to even have tried to translate this, so I could like read it at all. This is also not a very fancy book. This is like one of those Amazon on-demand prints. Yeah, this text is important because it is basically the biography of Habibullah Kalakani. Yeah, Habibullah Kalakani, who was king of Afghanistan for 9 months in like 1929, if I'm not mistaken. And this Habibullah Kalakani is by many regarded as a sort of Robin Hood-like rags to riches hero that put a common man in the throne. You know, it's that kind of vibe. And this book is a sort of biography of that person, celebrating that person, honestly. Khalilullah Khalili is a big fan, that's for sure. This is basically a historic retelling by somebody who literally witnessed it, because Khalilullah Khalili like lived at the time, and it goes deeper. I'm gonna nerd out about my Afghanistan knowledge, I guess, which is not very deep knowledge, but whatever. Habibullah Kalakani was the successor of Aminullah Khan. That was the king before him. And Aminullah Khan is probably one of the most interesting kings of Afghanistan, because he was the first one who tried to majorly modernize this very traditional country, which like it came with a lot of good ideas, but it probably was too fast. It just didn't work out in the end. So his kingship ended with civil turmoil pretty much, which also led to Habibullah Kalakani ending up in the throne for 9 months. So I'm incredibly interested in this Aminullah Khan. But I was afraid going into this book that Khalili would just villainize the guy. Not only because this book is about his successor, but also because Khalilullah Khalili's own father reportedly died during the events of Aminullah's rise to the throne. So there is, I guess, even some personal grudge from the author against this Aminullah Khan. So I really went into this expecting or like fearing that he would just villainize this Aminullah Khan through and through, even though Aminullah Khan, honestly, from what I gathered, was an interesting king and had some genuinely good intentions, even if not all of them were good, and even if they weren't executed well. but I was honestly positively surprised. Khalilullah Khalili actually gives Amanullah Khan some empathy and understanding and some respect even throughout this, even though it is about his demise and all his wrongdoings as well, with the eventual finale of Habibullah Khan rising to the throne instead and being, the first common man in the kingdom, and so on and so forth. Interestingly though, and I think I've read before that this biography, this book, seems to be somewhat controversial, and I think I might see why. I mean, this Habibullah Kalakani is regarded as this rags to riches Robin Hood-esque common man hero by a lot of people in the country. But reading up on him, like Wikipedia and whatever, Habibullah Kalakani was known as a bandit himself who for a while was going around with a bandit group, robbing people or whatever, doing criminal activities himself. And even getting imprisoned at some point because of that. This book, and I found this super interesting, this book takes that and tells the story that Habibullah Kalakani actually stopped this bandit group and then got wrongfully imprisoned by a justice system that framed him for it. And I don't claim to know which version is closer to the truth. I just like to point this out because it's such an interesting discrepancy between this book and other historic sources. So I could see that being a reason why this is controversial or whatever. Whether this is true or not, this is still a very significant and interesting book. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. This book, again, the translation wasn't that great, but I was able to follow the story, which is good. And there was even some good prose in there. There were paragraphs in here that I thought were well written. But again, that's where the poetry book comes into play, with the introduction about the significance of verbal exchange and shit. Because this book does feel more like a story that one would tell verbally than what is one maybe used to reading. Which, again, with the context of that introduction from the poetry book, makes a lot of sense. It just put a nice frame around that. To be clear, this book was actually written down by the author when Khalilullah Khalili was spending time in the USA, I believe. But it very much feels stylistically like a story that would be told rather than written. And I guess that makes sense given that Khalilullah Khalili, as a poet in Afghanistan, definitely spent more time verbally reciting his work. But yeah, that was that. I wouldn't call this book great as a novel, but I am absolutely thankful that I was able to read this, because this again was a very cool insight into Afghan culture and history by a prominent figure in the country who witnessed this himself. And that was my Afghan reading for this month. These two books really went hand in hand so well. If you are interested in poetry or Afghan culture, and you can find a way to read An Assembly of Moths, maybe the link is still up on Recta. Maybe you can get through their user interface and find it on there. I recommend reading that actually. It's such a nice book, such a nicely made book. Good package of things. And now, something completely different as the finale. Something that has nothing to do with what I previously talked about. But again, an NSFW piece of work. Way more so than the actual one from earlier, because this one is actually disgusting and deals with a lot of problematic themes that genuinely I wouldn't recommend for anyone with like a weak stomach or something. You have to be in the right mindset to get through this next book, I think. But I have it physically. Finally, Amygdalatropolis by B.R. Yeager. Straight up, if you got here from the timestamp or whatever, here are the trigger warnings. It's everything. Anything violent, disgusting that you can think about is here. Again, I'm most likely not actually going into the details of these things and just discussing this from a broader sense, but you should be aware that this book deals with these things, and it honestly does so very prominently. It is a good book though, I think. It does a very interesting thing. What Amygdalatropolis is, it is the story of an American hikikomori, so like an extreme shut-in that never leaves his room, literally. An American hikikomori that spends all his life alternating between bed and desktop PC, where he does nothing pretty much other than look at like gore on 4chan or whatever. It's literally majorly about a fictional 4chan alternative. The board, okay, shit. Maybe I have to explain 4chan. If you never heard of 4chan or you're not sure what 4chan is, 4chan is an image board where people can anonymously talk about whatever they want. It has different boards with different themes. It's a message board pretty much. It's called an image board because you can attach a picture, an image to each message if you wanted to. But it is like known for being an anonymous message board that has been on the internet for a long time with minimal moderation, which always made it a popular hub for very fringe, edgy, aggressive discussions. And this book centers for a lot of it around a 4chan, a fictional 4chan, and it doesn't pull any punches. The homophobia, the racism, the misogyny, the nihilism, the hatred, everything is in here. Raw. I would like to open a page and show you, but I can't actually make sure that there isn't an actual majorly problematic word in there. Oh yeah, but I have a picture. Show the picture as an example. Poop. Poopity poop. I read this in public and I'm not proud of it, but a lot of these pages are actually like posts from this message board, and these posts are incredibly authentic. As someone who has actually spent a lot of time, or a decent amount of time, on 4chan as a younger person, not anymore, these are extremely authentic. Like pretty much all of these fictional message board posts, and a lot of them are genuinely disgusting and despicable. I could absolutely, completely, with no doubt, imagine them on the real 4chan board, or like a different similar site. And because of that, it can be very exhausting to read. Additionally, the story, the more you learn about the main character and how he became such a reclusive lost soul, there's even more genuinely disgusting and despicable things that pop up, but it's also incredibly engaging because it is so committed to this authenticity, depicting this really ugly situation online subculture to tell the story, but in an extremely like real way, in a really authentic way. If you're interested in this online subculture, which undoubtedly has a lot of like ripe ground for exploration with the people that are like connected with this sort of thing, if you're interested in this kind of online subculture, I don't think there's much, if any, other fiction that represents it so authentically as this book. And there's also this super clever thing. The author really manages to have like a sort of hypnagogic, blurry atmosphere by having these different layers of the protagonist's experience happen at the same time. Just like when you're browsing the internet, you have different tabs open that you follow at the same time. This book, with like different fonts and formatting, has you read through different layers of this person's existence, like an image board thread, his real life, like then his dreams, or like a cam girl chat log or whatever. And it's like I would love to show an example of this, but I can't show this text because every page has something really problematic and disgusting, because these people on this message board are very problematic and disgusting. You just have to believe me. The author makes use of like fonts and formatting to have these different layers on the same page without having it like confusing, but that makes for this really cool atmosphere where everything happens at once, sort of, and everything is in a sort of like dream state, because the person's life just staying in this fucking room and just alternating between bed and computer, it is just like a blurry dream state, honestly. And he makes that, the author translates that really well through this book, which also makes for some interesting clashing between sides, which like there was this one moment where at the same time we follow this image board thread where a bunch of people group together to organize this really, really cruel harassment campaign against a person, and at the same time we follow this chat log of a cam girl stream. And while we have this super cruel, vile like harassment campaign against this innocent person, we also have in this chat log a person that awkwardly tries to like show empathy towards the cam girl because the cam girl showed signs of self-harm or whatever. And it's like the showcase for this, I read it as a showcase for this like two-faced, hypocritical morality compass of a lot of people that spend so much time on these unhinged image boards. Like there's a lot of interesting stuff about this. And also away from the computer, eventually the protagonist is somewhat pulled away from the computer in the digital world because tragedy strikes, and it makes for further interesting exploration of this character, who also is a completely unlikable and despicable character. I'm just gonna stay at that, but it's an interesting character study of this specific kind of lost soul that just escapes real life through this immoral digital world. And that this book represents in an incredibly authentic way, so much so that you do have to be in the right like headspace or whatever and have a strong stomach or be familiar with this trash to actually get through this. I think this is definitely not a book for everybody. It's vile. Like I said, I read this shit in public on my daily commute, and I gotta say, I've never felt this like uncomfortable reading something in public And I read Gabrielle Whitcomb's The Necrophiliac on the train. This is worse. Fuck. It is disgusting and vile and full of awful human beings that mirror real life, but it uses that for a really interesting character study. That's really the bottom line from this, and that's where I would recommend this if you are, like I already said, if you are interested in this specific kind of lost soul and this internet subculture of like image boards and whatever, then this is a very good read. A very interesting fictional exploration of these types of people, or the type of people that can be on there. Yeah. And that is it. We made it. That is my September reads. To be fair, at the time of recording this, I still have like a week left. And my current book that I'm reading right now is not very long. So there is the possibility that I'm finishing another book before the end of the month. But I think I'm gonna just leave it at that and talk to you about that next month. This is it for today. 7 books for this vlog is well enough. I hope you got something out of this. I hope you enjoyed my random rambling. Maybe you got your dishes done while having my voice in the background or whatever. That's good. I'm proud of you. Dishes have to be done. And I'm wishing you a very nice rest of the day or night or whatever. See you next month. Bye bye.